Welcome to Mental Flight, where bold ideas take off and untold truths soar beyond the limits of ordinary thinking. Then fasten your mind, you're cleared for takeoff. 0.5000 tourists visited Burkina Faso in March, marking a turning point in the country's global image and signaling the unexpected success of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's bold national strategy. For decades, Burkina Faso was rarely mentioned in international travel brochures, often overshadowed by its geopolitical challenges and security concerns. Yet under Traoré's leadership, a calculated and confident effort has reshaped the nation's tourism narrative. In just 1 month, the influx of 50,000 international visitors has stunned analysts and sparked global curiosity. This surge did not happen by accident. Traoré's administration has made strategic moves to reposition Burkina Faso as a secure and culturally rich destination in West Africa. His government invested in infrastructure near major historical and ecological sites, improved internal mobility, and launched a series of partnerships with regional and Pan-African travel platforms. But beyond physical investments, Traoré led a shift in perception. Through speeches, symbolic actions, and media outreach, he framed Burkina Faso not as a land in crisis, but as a rising African power and independent sovereign state open for respectful and conscious tourism. Security reforms played a key role in convincing hesitant travelers. Traoré himself, a military man, took a hands-on approach to stabilizing key areas and clearing out foreign military influences. By restoring local command and prioritizing national dignity, he projected confidence and control. This sense of order gave both Burkina citizens and foreign travel planners the reassurance they needed. Tourism agencies began to pay attention. Venture travelers, heritage enthusiasts, and African diaspora communities started arriving, not only to explore but to support a movement. Tourists arriving in March were greeted not just by landscapes and landmarks, but by a country full of pride. From the iconic Sindo Peaks to the royal courts of Tibel, from the bustling markets of Ouagadougou to the sacred groves near Babo Dioulasso, visitors experienced a nation that is rooted in tradition, yet determined to shape its future. The warmth of the people, the music, the food, and the stories, these were not packaged commercial attractions, but living proof of a culture untouched by Western tourism formulas. Many see this as more than just a tourism boost. It is being called a quiet revolution, a national reawakening. For Ibrahim Traoré, it is another chapter in his mission to redefine Burkina Faso's destiny politically, economically, and now culturally. He has turned tourism into a tool of resistance, pride, and progress. What was once a fragile state has suddenly become a symbol of African potential. In the end, the real victory lies not just in the number of tourists, but in what their presence represents. It is proof that when a nation reclaims its voice and tells its own story, the world listens. 50,000 came in March. The question now is, how many more are coming next? When Captain Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership of Burkina Faso, few could have predicted the scale of transformation he would set into motion in such a short time. At a time when most of the world viewed the country through a lens of conflict, instability, and dependency on foreign powers, Traoré envisioned something radically different. He saw a nation not as a victim of its past, but as a sovereign force, capable of reshaping its future and inviting the world to witness it. One of the most surprising fronts of this transformation has been tourism, an industry previously unimaginable for Burkina Faso due to years of insecurity and external narratives that painted the country as dangerous and unstable. But through calculated decisions, assertive leadership, and a deep cultural confidence, Traoré has rebranded Burkina Faso as a safe, sovereign tourist destination. This shift did not begin with glossy brochures or flashy ad campaigns. It began with sovereignty. Traoré made it clear from day one that Burkina Faso would no longer operate as a playground for foreign militaries or rely on the presence of international forces to maintain internal order. Instead, he focused on rebuilding national command structures, empowering local security forces, and reclaiming territorial integrity. This push for full control over national security created a perception of restored order. While other countries in the region remained entangled in foreign interventions, Burkina Faso under Traoré began to look like a country standing on its own feet, taking responsibility for its destiny. That image, that sense of self-determination, became the foundation of its rebranding. But security alone doesn't attract tourists. Traoré's approach went deeper. He understood that modern travelers, especially those seeking alternative or conscious tourism, are drawn not just to safety, but to authenticity and meaning. Traoré began showcasing the richness of Burkina Faso's culture, heritage, and natural beauty. This wasn't about creating artificial resorts or westernized tourist bubbles. It was about opening the doors to real Burkina Faso, its ancient, mossy kingdoms, its stunning Sahelian landscapes, its vibrant artisan traditions, and its stories of resistance, pride, and unity. Under his leadership, local communities were not sidelined but positioned as central storytellers in the nation's tourism rebirth. Another key move was his rejection of dependency on international NGOs and foreign investors to develop the tourism sector. Instead of waiting for outsiders to define what Burkina Faso's appeal should be, Traoré's government leaned into national pride. They invested in internal development roads, cultural sites, transportation hubs, not to meet external expectations, but to serve their own people, and then invite the world to join. This approach framed tourism not as an export commodity, but as a means of cultural diplomacy. Visitors were not just customers, they were witnesses to a national awakening. Traoré's media strategy also played a crucial role. He leveraged his image not as a polished suit-wearing politician, but as a grounded, relatable soldier of the people. His presence at local festivals, his speeches delivered in local languages, and his repeated emphasis on African dignity created a unique branding effect. International audiences began to see Burkina Faso not as a conflict zone, but as a land of leadership with integrity. His authenticity translated into credibility, and that credibility became contagious. Regional influencers, Pan-African platforms, and diaspora communities began promoting travel to Burkina Faso, not just as a leisure activity, but as a statement of solidarity. This new narrative was further supported by visuals of real development. Airports began functioning with renewed order. Public spaces were cleaned and made safer. Historic sites were restored. Small but significant signs of order began emerging. And with every improvement, the message was clear. This country is back, on its feet. Not only did this encourage domestic pride, but it reassured potential tourists who had previously dismissed Burkina Faso as inaccessible or unsafe. An overlooked yet powerful element of Traoré's rebranding was his cultural positioning. He didn't try to mimic Western tourism models. Instead, he aligned Burkina Faso with a Pan-African identity, a space of cultural resistance and resilience. This identity resonated deeply with African diaspora travelers seeking reconnection with the continent. For them, visiting Burkina Faso wasn't just a vacation, it was a pilgrimage to a land that symbolized African self-determination. By aligning the country with that narrative, Traoré expanded its appeal far beyond traditional tourism markets. Even the symbols of the state were repurposed. National holidays were reframed to celebrate not colonial independence, but true liberation from neo-colonial structures. The Burkina flag began to appear more prominently in international spaces, not through diplomatic channels, but through grassroots cultural expressions, music, fashion, art. Each expression carried an unspoken message. This country has reclaimed its soul, and it's ready to be seen. Traoré also fostered a rare sense of internal unity. In a country often divided by ethnicity and regionalism, he projected a message of shared purpose. This domestic cohesion created a backdrop of calm and hospitality that tourists could feel. Visitors arriving in Burkina Faso weren't just greeted by officials, they were welcomed by a population that believed in the story their leader was telling. That collective spirit became one of the nation's greatest assets. In essence, the rebranding of Burkina Faso under Traoré was not a PR campaign. It was a political stance. By asserting sovereignty, restoring security, celebrating culture, and embodying authenticity, Traoré reshaped global perception without compromising local integrity. what emerged wasn't just a tourist destination, it was a sovereign nation, daring the world to see it differently. The resurgence of tourism in Burkina Faso didn't emerge from coincidence or luck. It was the result of deliberate and strategic actions taken under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who understood that no tourist would willingly walk into a land consumed by chaos and fear. The foundation of any tourism economy is stability, and Traoré knew that for the world to recognize Burkina Faso as a viable destination, would first have to clean up its most pressing threat: insecurity. That's where the transformation began, not with airports or hotels, but with boots on the ground and flags reclaimed. The state took decisive action to confront insurgent threats, restore law and order, and remove foreign military elements, whose presence had long symbolized dependency and humiliation. This bold recalibration of security priorities created a sense of national control that had been absent for years. And it sent a powerful message to the world: Burkina Faso was now managing its own house. Security reform didn't just mean deploying more troops. It meant creating a visible atmosphere of safety and order. Road checkpoints were redesigned to be less intrusive and more efficient. Regional patrols were restructured to include local knowledge and key tourist corridors like the roads connecting Ouagadougou to Bobo Dioulasso were heavily monitored and maintained. Local militias, once rogue and disconnected, were integrated into national defense strategies with clearer command structures. The state reclaimed territory, but more importantly, it reclaimed public confidence. Residents began to feel safer in their own towns, and this security trickled up to external observers. Tour operators, who had long blacklisted Burkina Faso, began reconsidering its potential. The image of a government capable of defending its people laid the groundwork for the reintroduction of tourism. While security formed the core of the reform, it was cultural pride that gave Burkina Faso its unique edge. Countries for safety, they come for story, spirit, and soul. Traoré's government understood that Burkina Faso's cultural depth was not just a passive resource, but a living force that could attract and captivate. Unlike countries that polished their heritage for foreign consumption, Burkina Faso leaned into its raw, unfiltered identity. The mossy kingdoms, the sacred groves, the rhythmic drumming, the artisan crafts all were elevated as pillars of national identity and promoted with pride. Local festivals were not modified to suit outside tastes. Instead, they were celebrated more authentically than ever before, allowing tourists to witness, not consume, Burkinabe culture. This cultural resurgence was deeply political. It signaled that Burkina Faso would not market itself through a borrowed lens. There were no artificial safari parks created to mimic East African tourism models. There were no beachfront resorts imported from European design templates. Instead, there were community-led excursions, village-based experiences, storytelling nights around fires, and culinary events showcasing traditional dishes without dilution. Tourists were not just guests, they were participants in a culture that had survived colonization, war, and economic neglect. The connection between security and culture became most visible in the way historic sites were treated. In previous years, many heritage locations had been abandoned or left unguarded due to insecurity. Under the new strategy, these spaces were not only protected but revived. Local guides were trained to provide historical context. Elders were invited to share oral histories, and youth were employed as caretakers and custodians. This investment in cultural heritage had dual benefits. It created local jobs and restored national dignity. For the tourist, it offered a deeply immersive experience rooted in real history rather than tourist fiction. The government also began using cultural symbolism in its broader messaging. The Burkinabe flag, national slogans, and images of ancestral heroes became more visible in public spaces, in media, and even in the branding of tour initiatives. Cultural centers received new funding. Regional languages were promoted instead of sidelined. This assertive cultural pride made Burkina Faso stand out on the global stage not just as a safe place, but as a place with something to say. And for many tourists, particularly from the African diaspora, that message resonated strongly. They weren't just visiting a country, they were engaging with a bold and unbroken spirit. Digital storytelling amplified this transformation. While traditional media largely ignored Burkina Faso, the government and its supporters turned to social media platforms to showcase real moments dancers in traditional dress, restored mosques, market scenes, and the smiling faces of returning tourists. These visuals contrasted sharply with old narratives of violence and decay. Each post, each video clip, and each interview acted as a pixel in a new image the world was beginning to see. What made the tourism surge unique was how organic it felt. It wasn't the result of foreign tour companies parachuting in with polished packages. It came from the ground up, from people feeling proud of their country again. When 50,000 tourists visited Burkina Faso in March, it was more than just a surprising statistic. It marked a profound shift in how the world viewed a nation long defined by instability, poverty, and political unrest. For years, Burkina Faso had been boxed into the image of a forgotten, fragile state rarely mentioned in travel circuits, and frequently overshadowed by security concerns, negative headlines, and a lack of international investment. But in 1 month, that narrative was challenged, not just by government announcements or media campaigns, but by the actual movement of thousands of travelers who physically stepped into the country, walked its streets, visited its markets, and experienced its soul. The sudden influx of visitors served as a public vote of confidence. It was not only a boost to tourism, it was a message to the international community that Burkina Faso had entered a new era. The sheer volume of 50,000 visitors in a single month is unprecedented for a nation that was, till recently, considered too unstable for international travel. This wasn't a seasonal fluke or a result of a major international event. It was a reflection of multiple elements aligning security improvements, cultural visibility, government efforts, and changing global consciousness. People began to see Burkina Faso not as a failed state, but as a place reclaiming its identity and control. That perception shift is as powerful as any reform because how a country is viewed influences investment, diplomacy, media portrayal, and long-term trust. Social media played a significant role in amplifying this change. Photos and videos taken by travelers showed a very different Burkina Faso than the one usually projected by Western media outlets, instead of conflict zones. Viewers saw bustling local markets, children dancing in the streets, traditional ceremonies, handmade crafts, and sweeping Sahelian landscapes. These images went viral in niche travel communities, diaspora circles, and alternative tourism forums. The narrative was no longer shaped by crisis coverage, but by first-hand experience. As these stories spread, a new layer of legitimacy was added to the country's evolving reputation. The symbolism was further reinforced by who these travelers were. Many were not typical vacationers looking for beach resorts or luxury getaways. They were explorers, educators, African diaspora, reconnected with their roots, and individuals consciously choosing Burkina Faso as a statement. For some, it was political. For others, spiritual. But for all, it was meaningful. Their presence challenged assumptions and added a layer of depth to the term tourism. It became a form of witness, a form of respect, and a quiet but powerful act of solidarity with a nation reclaiming its sovereignty. The influx also shifted perceptions within the country itself. For local citizens who had grown up under the shadow of instability and hardship, seeing foreign faces walking through their towns was an emotional and psychological turning point. It was validation. It was a sign that the outside world was finally looking again, but this time, not with pity or judgment, but with curiosity and interest. Business owners reopened shops, guides dusted off old scripts, artists began selling to new audiences, and young people began learning new languages in hopes of serving a growing stream of global guests. This internal optimism radiated outward. The people of Burkina Faso became ambassadors of their own nation. In diplomatic circles, the shift was undeniable. Regional governments began paying closer attention to what was happening within Burkina Faso. How did a country that had been written off only months ago suddenly manage to attract tens of thousands of visitors? What were they doing differently? What was the role of leadership, and more specifically of Ibrahim Traoré? His name began appearing in think tanks, articles, and international conversations not just as a revolutionary figure, but as a statesman whose vision was producing measurable results. In an age where global reputation is currency, March became the month Burkina Faso started earning it back. Even the tourism industry itself responded.